When death becomes your teacher, picture this: 1,000,000 Persian soldiers stretch across the horizon like a dark ocean. Their armor glints in the morning sun. Their war cries echo through the mountains. Any rational commander would retreat. Any sane king would negotiate. But Leonidas of Sparta wasn't interested in sanity. He was interested in something far more dangerous: immortality through principle. What most people don't understand about Leonidas is that his legendary courage wasn't born in the heat of combat. It was forged in the quiet moments before the storm. While Hollywood shows us the spectacle of clashing shields and flying spears, the real power of the Spartan king lay in what he did when nobody was watching. In the hours before battle, when fear whispers its poison and doubt creeps into even the strongest hearts, Leonidas followed a code that would later inspire the greatest philosophers of the ancient world. The Stoics, Zeno, Heracles, Posidonius, Musonius Rufus, Marcus Aurelius, they all wrote extensively about virtues that Leonidas had already embodied centuries before their time. They theorized about courage, discipline, and emotional mastery. But Leonidas, he lived it, breathed it, died for it. You see, the king of Sparta understood something that escapes most modern leaders. True strength isn't about eliminating fear, it's about dancing with it. It's not about avoiding death, it's about making peace with it. It's not about leading from the rear, it's about charging first into the darkness and trusting others will follow your light. Today, you might not face Persian armies, but you face battles just as real. Economic uncertainty, career transitions, relationship conflicts, health scares. The voice in your head that says you're not strong enough, smart enough, worthy enough, these are your Thermopylae moments. And if you want to stand firm when life tries to break you, you need to learn from the master himself. What you're about to discover isn't just history, it's a blueprint. 5 specific practices that transformed an ordinary man into a legend. 5 rituals that can transform your relationship with fear, uncertainty, and challenge. 5 principles that turn victims into victors. Leonidas didn't just fight wars. He created them within himself first and won them. That's what made him unbreakable. That's what you're about to learn. If this story inspired you, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and make sure to subscribe for more content like this. And hey, don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a moment of wisdom and warrior spirit. Now, let's dive in. Ritual 1. The sacred art of inner stillness. The first thing that separated Leonidas from every other warrior king in history wasn't his strength or his strategy, it was his silence. While other commanders shouted orders and gave rousing speeches, Leonidas would find a boulder, sit perfectly still, and disappear into himself. This wasn't meditation in the way we think of it today. This was reconnaissance of the soul. While his men sharpened their bronze spears and adjusted their leather straps, their king was sharpening something far more lethal: his mind. He was creating what Zeno of Citium would later call the fortress of the soul, an inner citadel that no external force could breach. Imagine being one of those 300 warriors, watching your king in those final hours before you march to certain death. He's not pacing nervously. He's not barking commands or trying to rally morale with empty promises. He's simply present, completely, utterly, unmovably present. His breathing is steady. His gaze is fixed on something beyond the horizon, something you can't see but somehow feel. That silence spoke louder than any battle cry ever could. It said, "I am not governed by panic. I am not ruled by circumstance. I have found something within myself that cannot be shaken, and because I have found it, you can find it too." Zeno taught that the wise man must build his soul like a stone wall, weatherproof, unshakable, resistant to every storm. Leonidas had never read those words, but he lived them. His pre-battle stillness wasn't escapism. It was the ultimate form of preparation. While chaos swirled around him, he was creating order within himself. Modern neuroscience confirms what ancient warriors knew instinctively. The mind that can remain calm under pressure performs exponentially better than the mind driven by reactive emotion. When you silence the external noise, you can finally hear your inner wisdom. When you stop being pushed around by circumstances, you can start making choices from a place of genuine power. But here's what most people get wrong about this practice. Leonidas wasn't trying to eliminate his emotions. He was learning to conduct them like a master orchestra conductor. Fear was the violin section, present, important, but not allowed to overpower the symphony. Anger was the percussion, useful for rhythm and emphasis, but disciplined and precise. Hope was the string section, beautiful and uplifting, but grounded in reality. The Stoics understood that emotions aren't the enemy of wisdom, uncontrolled emotions are. Leonidas proved this principle with his life. He felt everything his men felt, the weight of impossible odds, the pain of leaving families behind, the very human desire to live another day. But he felt these things while maintaining what Marcus Aurelius would later call the discipline of assent. The ability to choose your response rather than being controlled by your reactions. Think about your own life. How often do you make important decisions while emotionally hijacked? How many opportunities have you missed because you couldn't find stillness in the storm? How many relationships have you damaged because you reacted instead of responded? Leonidas teaches us that before you can conquer external challenges, you must establish sovereignty over your internal landscape. This requires daily practice. It requires creating rituals of stillness, even when, especially when, the world demands your constant reaction. One of his surviving warriors later recounted that watching Leonidas prepare for battle was like watching a man prepare for sleep. Not because he was casual about the danger, but because he had made such deep peace with himself that even impending death couldn't disturb his equilibrium. This is the first lesson of the warrior king. Master the art of strategic stillness, not as avoidance, but as preparation, not as weakness, but as the foundation of unshakable strength. In a world that profits from your distraction, your ability to find silence becomes a revolutionary act. The next time you face a challenge that makes your heart race and your mind scatter, remember the Spartan king on his boulder. Sit, breathe, listen to what emerges from the quiet. Don't seek the answers outside yourself. They're already within, waiting to be discovered in the sacred space between stimulus and response. Leonidas knew that battles are won or lost in the mind before they're ever fought with weapons. His greatest victory wasn't at Thermopylae. It was the daily victory of choosing presence over panic, depth over distraction, inner authority over external chaos. That victory is available to you too, but only in the silence. Ritual 2. The brotherhood of the worthy Leonidas understood a truth that most leaders never grasp. You become who you surround yourself with, especially under pressure. While other kings built armies based on numbers, Leonidas built his force based on character. He didn't want soldiers who would fight for him. He wanted warriors who would die with him. There's a profound difference. The 300 men who followed him to Thermopylae weren't conscripted. They weren't randomly selected. They were chosen through a process that went far deeper than physical prowess or military skill. Leonidas was looking for something that couldn't be trained or taught, the quality of moral fiber that bends but never breaks. Heracles, the Stoic philosopher, wrote about concentric circles of concern, the idea that we naturally care most about those closest to us, then gradually extend our care outward to family, community, and humanity. But he also taught that the strength of the outer circles depends entirely on the integrity of the inner ones. Leonidas lived this principle with ruthless precision. Each of his 300 had been tested not in staged exercises, but in the crucible of real life. He watched how they treated their families. He observed their behavior when they thought no one was looking. He studied their reactions to fear, to pain, to temptation. He was assembling not just an army, but a brotherhood of souls who shared an uncompromising commitment to honor. This wasn't about creating an echo chamber of yes men. These warriors challenged each other, pushed each other, held each other accountable to impossible standards. But they shared something deeper than opinions. They shared character. When one man wavered, the others became his backbone. When doubt crept in, the collective strength of the group restored individual courage. Modern research on high-performance teams confirms what Leonidas knew intuitively. Group dynamics under stress reveal everything about individual character. A team with one weak link, not in skill but in resolve, will often collapse entirely when faced with extreme pressure. But a team where every member has been tested by fire becomes exponentially stronger than the sum of its parts. Consider your own inner circle. Not your acquaintances or colleagues, but the people you would trust in your darkest hour. The ones whose judgment you respect even when it hurts. The ones who would tell you hard truths rather than comfortable lies. How carefully have you chosen them? How intentionally have you built relationships based on mutual growth rather than mutual convenience? Leonidas made one of the most difficult decisions a leader can make. He turned away volunteers who didn't meet his standard. It wasn't about military experience or physical strength. It was about the depth of commitment in their eyes. He could see the difference between someone who wanted to be part of a glorious cause and someone who was prepared to die for an essential principle. This selection process created an almost mystical bond among the chosen few. They knew they had been seen, evaluated, and deemed worthy by a man whose own worthiness was beyond question. That knowledge transformed their relationship to fear, to pain, to death itself. They weren't just fighting alongside each other, they were proving worthy of each other. Heracles taught that we have moral obligations to different circles of people, but our deepest obligation is to ensure that our closest relationships are built on virtue rather than mere affection. Leonidas embodied this teaching. His love for his men was demonstrated not through sentiment, but through the supreme compliment of considering them worthy of sharing his fate. The modern application of this principle is both liberating and challenging. It means taking inventory of your relationships with brutal honesty. It means asking yourself whether the people closest to you inspire you to be better or enable you to remain comfortable. It means having the courage to distance yourself from those who drain your energy and the wisdom to draw closer to those who strengthen your resolve. But it also means becoming worthy of the company you seek. Leonidas didn't just choose exceptional men. He became the kind of man that exceptional people would choose to follow. He embodied the standards he demanded from others. His integrity gave him the moral authority to be selective. When the Persian messenger came to demand Sparta's submission, he faced not just one king, but 300 men who had become extensions of that king's will. They didn't follow orders, they shared conviction. They didn't need commands. They moved with collective instinct, born from shared values. This is what Heracles meant when he wrote about expanding our circles of concern, not by lowering our standards, but by raising others to meet them. Not by accepting everyone, but by inspiring the best people to accept us. The tragedy of modern loneliness isn't that we're surrounded by too few people. It's that we're surrounded by too many people who don't truly know us or call us to our highest potential. Leonidas shows us another way. Fewer relationships, but deeper ones. Smaller circles, but stronger bonds. Less networking, more brotherhood. At Thermopylae, when the final moment came and death was certain, not one of the 300 tried to escape. Not because they couldn't, but because abandoning their brothers was literally unthinkable. They had been chosen not just to fight together, but to die together. And in that choice, they achieved something that outlasted their physical lives. They became eternal. Your battles might not be against Persian armies, but they're just as real. The question Leonidas would ask you is simple. Who are you fighting alongside? And more importantly, are you worthy of them? And they of you. Ritual 3. The alchemy of controlled passion. The greatest myth about warriors is that they don't feel fear. Leonidas felt it acutely. The night before Thermopylae, as he walked among his men making final preparations, he could smell it in the air, that sharp scent of human terror mixed with determination. What made him legendary wasn't the absence of fear, but his relationship with it. While other commanders tried to eliminate their soldiers' emotions through discipline or inspiration, Leonidas took a radically different approach. He taught his men to use their emotions as fuel rather than fighting them as enemies. This was his third ritual, the transformation of raw feeling into refined power. Posidonius, perhaps the most psychologically sophisticated of the Stoic philosophers, spent years studying the relationship between emotion and reason. He concluded that trying to eliminate human feeling was both impossible and undesirable. Instead, he advocated for what he called the royal art, the ability to guide and direct emotional energy rather than being overwhelmed by it. Leonidas mastered this art through practical application. When he saw a young warrior's hands shaking before battle, he didn't shame him or order him to stop. Instead, he said something that has echoed through military history. Good. Your body is preparing itself. The enemy's hands shake too, but they don't have the training to use that energy. You do. This approach created soldiers who were simultaneously more human and more effective. They didn't fight despite their emotions. They fought through them, with them, using them as sources of strength rather than sources of weakness. Fear became heightened awareness. Anger became focused aggression. Grief for fallen comrades became determination to honor their sacrifice. Modern psychology has validated what Leonidas knew intuitively. Suppressed emotions don't disappear. They go underground and often emerge in destructive ways. But emotions that are acknowledged, accepted, and channeled become powerful allies in achieving our goals. Think about your own relationship with difficult emotions. How often do you fight them, deny them, or try to push through them with sheer willpower? How often does this strategy actually work? Leonidas would suggest a different approach. Instead of fighting your emotions, learn to conduct them like a master musician conducts an orchestra. The Spartan training system wasn't designed to create emotionless robots. It was designed to create men who could feel deeply while acting rationally. They experienced pain, but didn't let pain paralyze them. They felt fear, but didn't let fear make their decisions. They knew grief, but didn't let grief prevent them from moving forward. Posidonius taught that the soul contains multiple forces: reason, emotion, desire, ambition, and that wisdom lies not in eliminating these forces, but in establishing reason as their natural leader. Leonidas proved this principle in practice. His reason didn't suppress his emotions. It organized them, directed them, and put them to work in service of his highest values. This has profound implications for how we handle modern challenges. Instead of trying to eliminate anxiety before a difficult conversation, we can use that anxiety as information about what matters to us. Instead of fighting our anger at injustice, we can channel it into constructive action. Instead of denying our grief over losses, we can let it deepen our appreciation for what remains. The key insight is that emotional mastery isn't about control in the sense of domination. It's about partnership. Leonidas didn't rule his emotions like a tyrant. He led them like a wise king leads his people. He listened to what they had to tell him, considered their input, but made his final decisions based on reason and principle. One of the most powerful examples of this came during the battle itself. When Leonidas saw his men falling around him, when he realized that the betrayal had made their position hopeless, he could have let despair overwhelm him. Instead, he transformed that emotional pain into something else entirely. A fierce joy at the opportunity to demonstrate what Spartan virtue looked like in its purest form. This transformation didn't happen automatically. It was the result of years of practice, of deliberately choosing response over reaction in smaller moments, so that when the ultimate test came, the pattern was already established. Leonidas had trained himself to ask not how do I feel, but how can I use what I feel to serve what I value. The practical application for your life is immediate and powerful. The next time you face a situation that triggers strong emotions, fear about a career change, anger at unfair treatment, sadness over a loss, pause and ask yourself, how can this emotion serve my highest purpose? Don't fight the feeling, recruit it. This is what Posidonius meant when he wrote about the therapy of the soul. Not the elimination of human nature, but its refinement and direction toward noble ends. Leonidas proved that a man can be simultaneously emotional and rational, passionate and disciplined, deeply feeling and decisively acting. The warriors who stood with him at Thermopylae weren't emotionless machines. They were men who had learned to love their families so deeply that they would die to protect them, to feel loyalty so intensely that betrayal became impossible, to experience pride so purely that dishonor was worse than death. In our age of emotional extremes, where we either suppress everything or express everything without filter, Leonidas offers a third path, the way of emotional wisdom. Feel deeply, but choose carefully. Experience fully, but respond thoughtfully. Let your emotions inform your decisions without letting them make your decisions. This is the warrior's relationship with the full spectrum of human experience. Not transcendence of emotion, but mastery through integration. Not the absence of feeling, but the presence of choice. Not the elimination of passion, but its transformation into power. Ritual 4. Death as the ultimate teacher. Most people spend their lives running from the thought of death. Leonidas spent his running toward it, not out of a death wish, but out of a profound understanding that mortality, when faced honestly, becomes the most powerful teacher available to human consciousness. His fourth pre-battle ritual was perhaps the most radical. He would spend time visualizing not victory, but his own death. Not in a morbid or despairing way, but with the analytical clarity of a strategist studying a map. He would imagine his body falling, his blood mixing with the earth, his final breath leaving his lungs. And strangely, this practice didn't make him weaker, it made him invincible. Musonius Rufus, the teacher's teacher among the Stoics, wrote extensively about death as philosophy's most practical subject. He argued that the fear of death was the root of almost all human suffering, that we make ourselves miserable, trying to avoid the inevitable, trying to control the uncontrollable, trying to make permanent what is by nature temporary. Leonidas had reached the same conclusion through lived experience rather than theoretical study. He understood that a man who has truly accepted his mortality cannot be threatened, because the ultimate threat has already been faced and found acceptable. This wasn't fatalism or resignation, it was liberation. When you know you're going to die, certain things become crystal clear. The meaningless becomes obviously meaningless. The important becomes urgently important. The time you've been wasting becomes precious. The relationships you've been neglecting demand attention. The dreams you've been postponing become immediate priorities. This is why Leonidas could look at a million-man army and feel not terror, but clarity. He wasn't calculating his chances of survival. He was calculating how to make his death count for something eternal. He wasn't asking, how can I live through this? but how can I live up to this moment? Musonius taught his students to practice what he called premeditation of evils, not to become pessimistic, but to become anti-fragile. By mentally rehearsing loss, setback, and even death, the student builds psychological immunity to being blindsided by life's inevitable challenges. Leonidas took this practice to its ultimate conclusion. He didn't just prepare for the possibility of death in battle, he prepared for the certainty of it. This preparation involved more than just mental visualization. He made peace with unfinished business. He said what needed to be said to the people who mattered. He arranged his affairs not just legally but spiritually. The result was a man who could fight without the desperate energy of someone trying to preserve his life, and therefore could fight with the focused energy of someone trying to perfect his death. His movements in battle were not the frantic thrashing of someone trying to avoid injury, but the precise actions of someone who had already accepted injury as part of the price. Modern psychology recognizes this phenomenon as optimal arousal theory, the idea that peak performance occurs when we're activated but not overwhelmed, challenged but not panicked. Leonidas achieved this state by removing the ultimate source of panic from the equation. Death couldn't threaten him because he had already welcomed it as a friend. But the practical application of this principle extends far beyond physical combat. In your career, relationships, health, finances, every area where you experience anxiety, the root of that anxiety is usually some form of death anxiety. Fear of professional death, failure. Fear of social death, rejection. Fear of psychological death, losing your identity. Leonidas teaches us to do the opposite of what every self-help guru recommends. Instead of visualizing success, visualize failure. Instead of affirming that everything will work out, accept that it might not. Instead of trying to guarantee outcomes, make peace with uncertainty. This practice doesn't make you pessimistic, it makes you fearless. When you've already faced the worst-case scenario in your mind and found ways to maintain your dignity and values even then, you operate from a position of profound psychological freedom. One of the most powerful historical accounts describes Leonidas on the morning of the final battle, calmly combing his hair and helping his men do the same. When a Persian scout observed this ritual and reported it to Xerxes, the emperor was baffled. Why would men about to die concern themselves with grooming? The answer reveals everything about the Spartan relationship with mortality. They weren't grooming for life, but for death. They wanted to die as they had lived, with attention to dignity, respect for tradition, and care for how they would be remembered. Their final hours weren't about clinging to life, but about perfecting their departure from it. Musonius Rufus would have recognized this behavior as the ultimate expression of philosophical practice. These men had so thoroughly internalized the principle that death is nothing to us, that they could focus on dying well rather than on avoiding death altogether. The liberation that comes from this practice is immediate and practical. When you stop trying to avoid failure, you can focus on executing excellence. When you stop fearing rejection, you can risk authentic connection. When you stop clinging to outcomes, you can pour yourself fully into process. This doesn't mean becoming reckless or careless with life. Leonidas valued life deeply, his own and others. But he valued something more than life, the opportunity to demonstrate that human beings can choose their values even in the face of ultimate threat. Especially in the face of ultimate threat, the modern fear of death has created a culture of half-living, of playing it safe, avoiding risk, postponing dreams, staying comfortable. Leonidas offers an alternative. Live so fully, with such commitment to your deepest values, that death becomes not a terrible ending, but a natural completion. This is why his story has survived 2,500 years. Not because he avoided death, but because he transformed death from an enemy into an ally, from a source of fear into a source of power, from the end of meaning into the ultimate expression of meaning. Practice dying, Musonius taught, so that you can practice living. Face mortality, Leonidas demonstrated, so that you can face anything. Ritual 5, the sacred responsibility of first movement. The fifth and final ritual of Leonidas reveals the deepest secret of leadership. The person who moves first shapes the reality that everyone else inhabits. While others waited for perfect conditions, complete information, or guaranteed outcomes, Leonidas understood that action itself creates the very conditions that make success possible. In every battle, he was the first warrior to engage the enemy, not because he was reckless, but because he understood the psychological dynamics of group courage. When soldiers see their leader advancing, they feel permission to be brave. When they see him hesitating, they feel permission to retreat. Leonidas knew that his first step forward was worth more than 1,000 words of encouragement. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his private journal centuries later, captured this principle perfectly. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. But he also understood that sometimes the most powerful way to change your mind is to change your actions first. Then let your psychology catch up. Leonidas embodied this principle in its purest form. He didn't wait to feel brave before acting bravely. He didn't wait for certainty before making decisive moves. He didn't wait for the perfect moment because he understood that perfect moments are created by imperfect actions, taken at imperfect times, by people committed to perfect principles. This approach to leadership revolutionized everything about how his men understood their own capabilities. They learned that courage isn't something you have, it's something you do. They discovered that confidence doesn't come from feeling sure, it comes from acting despite uncertainty. They realized that strength isn't about the absence of fear, it's about the presence of commitment. Modern neuroscience confirms what ancient warriors knew intuitively. Behavior change often precedes attitude change, not the other way around. When you act courageously, your brain begins to see you as a courageous person. When you move decisively, your nervous system adapts to operating at that level of intensity. When you lead by example, you literally reshape your identity through action. Think about the areas of your life where you've been waiting for motivation, waiting for the right opportunity, waiting for someone else to make the first move, waiting for fear to subside, waiting for certainty to emerge. Leonidas would look at you and ask a simple question. What are you really waiting for? Permission. The warrior king understood that in any challenging situation, someone has to move first. Someone has to break the stalemate. Someone has to risk looking foolish, being wrong, or failing publicly. He volunteered for that role not because he enjoyed it, but because he recognized it as the price of leadership. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one." This wasn't philosophical advice for Leonidas, it was tactical doctrine. In the chaos of battle, when split-second decisions meant the difference between victory and defeat, there was no time for deliberation. There was only time for action based on principles that had been rehearsed until they became instinctive. But this principle extends far beyond military applications. In your relationships, someone has to be the first to apologize, to be vulnerable, to change destructive patterns. In your career, someone has to be the first to propose new ideas, to take calculated risks, to challenge ineffective systems. In your personal growth, someone has to be the first to break old habits, to try new approaches, to invest in becoming better. Leonidas teaches us that someone doesn't have to be someone else. It can be you. In fact, it should be you, because when you make the first move, you gain what strategists call the initiative, the power to shape the battlefield, to force others to respond to your agenda rather than vice versa. The psychological impact of taking initiative is profound. It immediately shifts you from a reactive position to a creative one. Instead of responding to circumstances, you begin generating them. Instead of waiting for life to happen to you, you start happening to life. Instead of being a character in someone else's story, you become the author of your own. This doesn't mean being impulsive or reckless. Leonidas planned carefully, prepared thoroughly, and chose his moments wisely. But when the moment came, when analysis had to give way to action, he moved without hesitation, without looking back, without waiting for someone else to give him permission or guarantee his success. The historical record shows that Leonidas's first charge at Thermopylae was so unexpected and violent that it threw the entire Persian front line into chaos. They had expected the Spartans to wait defensively, to react to Persian moves. Instead, they found themselves responding to Spartan aggression, fighting the battle on Spartan terms, in Spartan space, according to Spartan timing. This is the hidden power of first movement. It doesn't just change what you do, it changes what everyone else can do. When you set the pace, others have to match it. When you establish the standard, others have to rise to it. When you define the terms of engagement, others have to operate within the reality you've created. Marcus Aurelius understood this principle from the opposite perspective, as an emperor who had to respond to countless initiatives from others. He wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." But Leonidas shows us the proactive version. The best strategy is not to wait for enemies to define the terms of conflict. In your own life, this means identifying the areas where you've been letting others set the agenda, where you've been waiting for permission that will never come, where you've been hoping for perfect conditions that will never arrive, where you've been postponing action until you feel completely ready, a feeling that never actually occurs. The practice is simple but not easy. Move first, speak first, risk first, fail first if necessary, but fail while moving forward rather than failing by standing still. This is what separates leaders from followers, creators from consumers, warriors from spectators. At Thermopylae, when the final Persian assault began and defeat was certain, Leonidas didn't wait for his men to make peace with death. He charged, and in charging, showed them how to die like kings. His last movement on earth was a movement forward, toward the enemy, toward glory, toward immortality. This is his final lesson. Don't wait for the perfect moment to live your values. Create imperfect moments and live them perfectly. Don't wait for courage to find you. Move toward fear and let courage catch up. Don't wait for the ideal circumstances. Take the first step and make the circumstances ideal through the quality of your response to them. The world is full of people with plans, dreams, and good intentions, but it belongs to those who move first. The Immortal Code, living the Spartan principle. Leonidas of Sparta never wrote a philosophy book. He never founded a school of thought. He never gave lectures on virtue or wisdom. Yet his life became a text that philosophers would study for millennia, not because of what he said, but because of how he lived and died. The Stoic masters who came after him, Zeno with his fortress of the soul, Heracles with his circles of concern, Posidonius with his emotional wisdom, Musonius with his death practices, Marcus Aurelius with his action philosophy, they were all describing principles that Leonidas had already embodied in flesh and blood, steel and courage. He found silence in chaos. He chose quality over quantity in relationships. He transformed emotion into power. He made peace with mortality. He moved first when others hesitated. These weren't just tactics for winning battles, they were technologies for winning life. But here's what makes Leonidas' story eternally relevant. He proved that ordinary humans can achieve extraordinary things when they align their actions with timeless principles. He wasn't born with supernatural courage or divine strength. He was a man who decided that some things matter more than survival, and then lived that decision so completely that it echoed across centuries. Today, your Thermopylae is different, but no less real. It might be a toxic relationship that demands courage to leave, a career transition that requires you to risk security for purpose, a health challenge that tests your relationship with mortality, a family conflict that needs someone to move first toward reconciliation, a creative dream that demands you act despite uncertainty. The question isn't whether you'll face situations that test your character. You will. The question is whether you'll have practiced the disciplines that allow you to meet those tests with dignity, purpose, and power. Leonidas teaches us that heroism isn't reserved for battlefields. It's available in every moment when you choose principle over convenience, truth over comfort, growth over safety, contribution over consumption. Every time you practice his 5 rituals, you're training for the moments that matter most. Silence your inner chaos before engaging external challenges. Choose your inner circle with the same care Leonidas chose his 300. Transform your emotions from obstacles into allies. Make peace with loss so you can fight without desperation. Move first when movement is needed most. These practices don't guarantee that you'll win every battle. Leonidas himself was defeated at Thermopylae, but they guarantee that you'll face whatever comes with the kind of integrity that transforms defeat into victory, endings into beginnings, mortality into immortality. The Spartans had a saying, "Come back with your shield or on it." It meant that you either return victorious or die in the attempt. But you never retreat, never surrender, never compromise your core values for temporary advantage. In the battles you face today, your shield is your character, your principles, your commitment to becoming the kind of person who can be trusted with difficulty, honored with challenge, respected through adversity. Leonidas shows us that it's possible to live and die in such a way that your story becomes a light for others, lost in darkness. Not because you were perfect, but because you were whole. Not because you never felt fear, but because you felt it and moved forward anyway. Not because you knew you would win, but because you knew who you were. The code of the warrior king isn't about warfare. It's about life lived at the highest level of human possibility. It's about becoming someone worthy of the trust that life has placed in you. Someone capable of meeting the ultimate test with ultimate grace. That code is available to you now, not someday, when you're stronger or smarter or more prepared. Now, in this moment, with whatever challenges you're facing, whatever resources you have, whatever fears are trying to convince you to wait for better circumstances. Leonidas didn't wait. He acted. He chose. He became. And in becoming fully himself under ultimate pressure, he showed the rest of us what we're capable of becoming. The Stoics wrote about virtue because they had seen it lived. They theorized about courage because they had witnessed it embodied. They described the good life because they had observed someone who had lived it completely, fearlessly, magnificently. That someone was a warrior king who understood that true victory isn't about defeating enemies. It's about becoming someone that defeat cannot touch, that compromise cannot corrupt, that death cannot diminish. His story ended at Thermopylae. His principles are eternal. His example is yours to follow. The question is simple: will you